I've never shared a bed." Emily's voice cracked in the darkness between them, and Luke Hayes stopped moving toward the bedroom door. Not innocence terror. 3 years running from Marcus Brennan's fists had taught her that bedrooms were battlefields, and intimacy was just another word for surrender. "I don't know how to do this without being afraid." Luke turned back, and his voice was steady as stone. "Then don't share a bed, Emily. Share my heart tonight instead." She looked at this cowboy who'd married her to save her life, who'd risked everything for a woman too broken to trust anyone, and realized some men destroy you. Others rebuild what was shattered. Luke Hayes was teaching her the difference. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the very end. Comment below with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. Emily's shoulder burned, like someone had pressed a branding iron against her skin. But she didn't make a sound as Luke led her through the back streets of Raven Ridge. The town was small enough that gunshots meant something, and within minutes she could hear voices calling out boots on wooden sidewalks, the kind of attention that would get her caught. "Keep walking," Luke said quietly. He wasn't touching her, wasn't forcing her anywhere, but something in his tone made her feet move. "My truck's around the corner." "Why are you helping me?" "Haven't decided if I am yet." That honesty stopped her more effectively than any threat could have. Emily turned to face him fully for the first time, and in the dim light spilling from a saloon window, she saw a man maybe 10 years older than her 26, wearing work clothes that had seen real labor and a face that had seen real trouble. "The men shooting at you," Luke said. "They somebody's hired guns or something personal. Does it matter?" "It does if they're coming to my ranch looking for you." Emily's jaw tightened. The truth was complicated and dangerous, and she'd learned 3 years ago that the truth got people killed. But this man had just watched her take a bullet and hadn't called the sheriff, hadn't walked away, hadn't done any of the dozen things that would have been easier than standing here asking questions. "My husband," she said finally. "Ex-husband, Marcus Brennan." Luke's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "The railroad man." "You know him. Know of him. Heard he's been buying up land from here to Montana. Doesn't much care whose property it is or what methods his people use to get it." Luke gestured toward her bleeding shoulder. "That his method. That's his kindness compared to what he did before I left." The words came out harder than Emily intended, sharp enough that Luke took a step back and raised both hands like he was gentling a spooked horse. "All right," he said. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get in my truck. I'm going to take you somewhere safe, and then you're going to tell me exactly what kind of trouble just rode into my life. Fair?" Emily wanted to argue, wanted to run, wanted to do anything except trust another man who thought he knew what was best for her. But her shoulder was bleeding through her torn dress, her legs were shaking from 3 days of walking, and the sound of men searching was getting closer. "Fair," she whispered. Luke's ranch sat 7 miles outside Raven Ridge, far enough from town that the darkness felt absolute and the silence felt like a physical thing pressing against Emily's ears. The truck rattled over dirt roads that seemed to go on forever and twice. Luke killed the headlights and waited in perfect stillness until he was satisfied no one was following. "You do this often?" Emily asked. "Help bleeding women in the middle of the night?" "First time, actually. Usually I just stick to cattle." That almost made her smile. Almost. But the pain in her shoulder and the fear in her chest, and 3 years of constantly looking over her shoulder, had worn down her ability to find anything funny. The ranch house was small, practically built the kind of place that spoke of function over comfort. Luke parked the truck behind the barn and came around to open Emily's door before she could do it herself. "Can you walk?" "I've been walking for 3 days. I can manage another 50 feet. But when she tried to step down from the truck, her knees buckled, and Luke caught her with the kind of quick reflexes that came from years of handling unpredictable animals. Emily stiffened immediately, every muscle in her body going rigid at the contact. Luke felt it. He set her down carefully and stepped back like she'd burned him. "Sorry," he said. "Don't be. I just don't—" Emily stopped herself. She'd learned not to explain her reactions, not to give people ammunition they could use against her later. "I'm fine." Luke studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward the house. "Medical supplies are inside. You fix yourself up while I make sure we weren't followed." He disappeared into the darkness before Emily could respond, and she was left standing alone in front of a stranger's house with blood dripping down her arm and the terrible certainty that she'd just made another mistake in a long line of mistakes that had started the day she married Marcus Brennan. The inside of the house matched the outside, clean, simple, with furniture that looked handmade and a kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. Emily found the medical kit in a cabinet above the sink, spread its contents on the table, and began the painful process of cleaning the bullet graze. She'd done this before. Not gunshots, but other wounds. Other nights when Marcus had decided she needed to learn a lesson about respect or obedience or whatever twisted justification he'd invented that particular evening. Emily had gotten good at patching herself up, at hiding the damage, at pretending everything was fine, until the bruises faded and the fear became manageable again. "You need help with that." Luke's voice from the doorway made her jump, and the antiseptic she was pouring sloshed across the table. He held up his hands again in that same gesture of peace. "Just checking," he said. "Road's clear for now, but if those men are who I think they are, they'll be back at first light with more people." "Then I'll leave before first light." "And go where?" Emily didn't have an answer for that. She'd been running for 3 years without a destination, just away, always away from the man who thought he owned her and the life that had nearly killed her. Luke crossed to the stove and put a kettle on to boil. "There's a spare room at the end of the hall," he said. "Door locks from the inside. You can stay there tonight, figure out your next move in the morning." "Why would you do that?" "Because you're hurt, and you're running, and I've got a spare room." Luke turned to face her, and his expression was matter-of-fact, like offering shelter to fugitives was just another evening chore. "Because Marcus Brennan's men shot at you on my property, which means this is partly my problem now, whether I like it or not. And because—" he paused, something complicated crossing his face. "Because I know what it looks like when someone's running from something that won't let them go." That last part hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning Emily didn't understand yet. But she recognized the truth in it, the kind of truth that came from experience rather than sympathy. "One night," she said. "Then I'm gone." "One night," Luke agreed. He made tea that tasted like mint, and Honey showed her to a room that was small but clean and left her alone with a lamp burning and the door locked, and the strange sensation of being safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. Emily didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed with her shoes on, and her hand on the small knife she'd stolen from a diner in Colorado, listening to the house settle around her, and waiting for the inevitable moment when the door would try to open and she'd have to run again. But Luke never came to the door. She heard him moving around the house for another hour, heard water running, and boots being set down, and finally, the sound of his own door closing. And then, nothing but silence and darkness, and the slow, painful realization that maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who meant what he said. Morning came too fast. Emily woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving around the kitchen, and for a confused moment, she thought she was back in the house in Denver, the one Marcus had bought with railroad money and filled with expensive furniture and the constant undercurrent of violence. Then she remembered. Wyoming. The ranch. Luke. She found him at the kitchen table, with a cup of coffee and a map spread out in front of him, marking something with a pencil. He looked up when she entered, took in her wrinkled dress and the exhaustion on her face, and pushed a second cup of coffee across the table. "Thought about your situation," he said. "Those men are going to come back looking for you. They'll check every ranch and farm within 20 miles. Ask questions, lean on people, until someone remembers seeing a woman matching your description." "I know. That's why I'm leaving." "Or you could stay." Emily almost dropped the coffee. "What?" "Stay. Work here. I need help with the ranch anyway, been meaning to hire someone for months." Luke tapped the map. "This property's remote enough that people don't come out here unless they have a reason. You keep your head down. Don't go into town, do the work. There's no reason anyone would think to look for Marcus Brennan's wife on a cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere. Ex-wife, Emily corrected automatically. Then the rest of his words caught up with her. You want me to work for you? Need someone who can handle horses, mend fence, help with the herd. Pays not much, but it includes room and board. And Luke met her eyes directly. It includes not asking questions about your past, and not expecting anything except honest work. There had to be a catch. There was always a catch. Men didn't just offer help without expecting something in return, and Emily had learned that lesson the hardest way possible. What do you get out of this? She asked. Help running my ranch, that's it. That's never it. Luke's jaw tightened, and for the first time Emily saw something close to anger in his expression. But when he spoke, his voice stayed level. I'm offering you work and a place to stay. You can take it or leave it. But don't stand there and assume the worst of me when I haven't given you reason to. He was right, and Emily hated that he was right. She'd become so used to expecting cruelty that kindness felt like a trap. But the alternative was walking out that door with nowhere to go, and men hunting her who wouldn't stop until Marcus got what he wanted. 1 month, she said. Trial basis. If it doesn't work out, I leave no questions. Fair enough? Luke stood and carried his coffee to the sink. Ranch work starts at 5. You're 3 hours late, but I'll give you a pass today since you were bleeding yesterday. Tomorrow you pull your weight or you're gone. That was the moment Emily started to believe he meant what he said. Not because he was being kind, but because he was being honest. Luke Hayes wasn't offering to save her or protect her or fix her broken life. He was offering her a job, and somehow that felt more respectful than any rescue could have been. The first week nearly killed her. Emily had grown up in Chicago, the daughter of a shopkeeper who died when she was 17 and left her with nothing except debt and the bad judgment that led to Marcus Brennan. She knew cities and survival and how to make herself invisible, but she didn't know anything about ranching. Luke taught her. Not gently, not with patience or praise, but with the same straightforward efficiency he applied to everything else. He showed her how to feed the horses, how to check fence lines, how to recognize when a cow was sick, and how to move a stubborn steer without getting kicked. He worked alongside her every day, said little, expected her to keep up, and never once mentioned the fact that she was terrible at all of it. By the end of the first week, Emily's hands were raw with blisters. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache, and she'd never felt more capable in her entire life. You're getting better, Luke said on the 8th morning as she successfully saddled her horse without his help. I'm less incompetent. There's a difference. Not to a horse there isn't. That almost made her smile again. Almost. They fell into a routine. Up before dawn, work until sunset, eat dinner in silence, and then Emily would retreat to her room and Luke to his, and they'd exist in the same space without crossing the invisible boundaries they'd both established that first night. But the silence between them started to change. It went from wary to comfortable, from defensive to companionable. And Emily found herself watching Luke when he didn't know she was looking. Watching the way he handled the animals with quiet confidence. The way he fixed problems instead of complaining about them. The way he never asked her questions, but somehow always knew when she needed help. The third week, Marcus's men showed up. Emily was in the barn checking on a mare that had been favoring her left front leg when she heard the trucks. 3 of them expensive and out of place on dirt roads pulling up to the house with the kind of aggressive certainty that meant trouble. She pressed herself against the wall and watched through a gap in the barn boards as 4 men climbed out. She recognized 2 of them, Fletcher and Davis, Marcus's favorite enforcers, the ones who'd broken her ribs that last time, and smiled while they did it. Luke walked out of the house before they could knock. Help you gentlemen with something. Fletcher did the talking. He was a big man who thought his size made him important, and his smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. Looking for someone. Woman mid-20s, dark hair, probably scared. Might have come through here a couple weeks back. Lot of women got dark hair. What she wanted for... That's private business between her and her husband. Then maybe her husband should be the one asking. Luke's voice stayed casual, but Emily could hear the steel underneath. This is private property, and I don't take kindly to people showing up unannounced, making demands. Davis stepped forward. He was smaller than Fletcher, but meaner, the kind of mean that enjoyed hurting things. We're not demanding. We're asking nice. You seen her or not? Haven't seen anybody except my cattle and my horses, and they're not much for conversation. Mind if we look around? I do mind, actually. Luke crossed his arms. You've got no warrant, no badge, and no business here, so I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Fletcher's smile got wider. That's not very neighborly. Neither is trespassing. The tension stretched tight enough to snap, and Emily's hand found the pitchfork leaning against the wall behind her. If this turned into a fight, she wasn't going to hide while Luke took the beating she'd brought to his door. But then, something unexpected happened. Davis glanced past Luke toward the barn, and his eyes swept right over the gap where Emily was watching. For a long moment she thought he'd seen her, thought everything was about to come crashing down. Then Davis turned back to Fletcher. He's clean. Let's go. Fletcher looked like he wanted to argue, but Davis was already walking back to the trucks. We'll be in touch, Fletcher said. You see this woman, you call this number. He pulled out a business card and held it toward Luke. Luke didn't take it. I'll be sure to do that. They left, but Emily knew they weren't gone. They'd come back, search harder, push further, until Marcus got what he wanted. He always did. She waited until the sound of the trucks faded completely before stepping out of the barn. Luke was still standing where they'd left him, the business card on the ground at his feet. They'll be back, Emily said. I know. I should leave. This is your home, your land. I shouldn't have brought this here. Luke turned to face her, and his expression was harder than she'd ever seen it. You didn't bring anything here except yourself. Those men and whatever your ex-husband wants, that's his choice, not yours. Don't take responsibility for somebody else's cruelty. The words hit Emily harder than a slap, harder than anything Marcus had ever done, because they were true, and she'd never let herself believe it before. She'd spent 3 years running, and the 3 years before that surviving, and in all that time, she'd never once considered that maybe the problem wasn't her. That maybe Marcus Brennan was exactly what he appeared to be, a man who thought money and violence gave him the right to own another person. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. Do what? Let someone help me. Trust someone. Stay in one place without waiting for everything to fall apart. Luke was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was gentler than she'd heard it before. Then don't trust me yet. Just stay. Do the work. Let tomorrow worry about itself. He paused. But Emily, those men come back, they're not going to find you here. That's a promise. It was the first time he'd used her name, and hearing it in his voice felt like something fundamental shifting in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something that might someday feel safe enough to call hope. Okay, she said. I'll stay. And for the first time since the night she ran from Marcus Brennan's house, with nothing except the clothes on her back and bruises she couldn't hide anymore, Emily meant it. The 4th week started with a broken fence and a missing calf, and Emily was the one who found both. She'd been checking the north pasture at dawn like Luke taught her, moving along the line with her eyes scanning for gaps. And there it was, 3 posts down, wire trampled into the mud, and tracks leading into the forest that bordered the property. She didn't go back to the house. She followed the tracks. The calf was 50 yards into the trees, tangled in brush and bawling with fear and exhaustion. Emily approached slowly, talking in the low, steady voice Luke used with spooked animals, and when she got close enough, she saw the problem barbed wire wrapped around the calf's front leg, cutting deep enough that blood stained the ground beneath it. Easy now, she said. I've got you. She'd never done this alone before. Luke had shown her how to calm a panicked animal, how to work wire cutters without causing more damage, how to think clearly when something was bleeding and afraid. But watching wasn't the same as doing, and her hands shook as she knelt beside the calf and started working the wire free. You're going to be fine. Just hold still. The calf kicked once hard enough to catch Emily in the ribs and knock the breath from her lungs. Pain exploded across her chest, where Marcus's men had broken bones 3 years ago, and for a moment, she was back in that house on that floor, waiting for the next kick to land. Then she heard Luke's voice in her head, steady and practical. Pain means you're alive. Deal with it and keep moving. Emily sucked in air, ignored the fire in her ribs, and went back to work. 3 minutes later, the wire came free, and she was half carrying, half dragging a 70-pound calf back through the forest toward the ranch. Luke met her at the tree line. He took one look at the calf, one look at her face, and lifted the animal from her arms without a word. Emily followed him to the barn where he set the calf down and started cleaning the wound. Fence was cut, Emily said. Wire was stripped clean off 2 posts. That wasn't weather damage. Luke's hand stopped moving. You sure? I know what wire cutters look like. He finished bandaging the calf's leg and stood up slowly, and Emily saw something in his expression she hadn't seen before, cold, calculating anger. They're trying to flush you out, he said, 'cause enough problems that I decide you're not worth the trouble and tell you to leave. Then maybe I should. Is that what you want? Emily thought about the past 3 weeks, about learning to trust her hands and her judgment, about falling into bed exhausted every night and waking up knowing exactly what the day would bring, about the way Luke never crowded her space or demanded explanations or expected anything except honest work. No, she said, but I don't want your ranch destroyed because of me either. Then we fix the fence and we keep working. And if they want to play games... Luke's voice went flat and dangerous. They're going to learn I don't play nice. That night, Luke taught her how to shoot. They went out past the barn to a clearing where he'd set up empty bottles on fence posts, and he handed her a rifle that felt too heavy and too powerful, and too much like a commitment to violence that Emily had spent 3 years trying to escape. I don't want this, she said. Doesn't matter what you want. Matters what you might need. Luke positioned himself behind her, not touching, just close enough that she could feel his presence. You know they're coming back. Next time might not be just cutting fence. Emily's hands tightened on the rifle. What if I can't shoot or can't kill? The bluntness of the question startled her. Both. Then you learn to shoot, and you hope you never have to find out about the other part. Luke's voice was steady in her ear. Rifle's going to kick. Don't fight it, just let it happen and adjust. Breathe out when you pull the trigger. And Emily... He paused. Nobody's asking you to be something you're not. But staying alive means knowing how to protect yourself. She missed the first 6 shots. The 7th shattered a bottle into pieces, and the sound of glass breaking felt like something fundamental changing inside her chest. Again, Luke said. By the time full darkness fell, Emily had hit 9 bottles out of 15 attempts, and her shoulder was bruised from the recoil, and something in her had shifted from victim to someone who refused to be one anymore. The 5th week brought the first real conversation they'd had that wasn't about ranch work. Emily was in the kitchen making coffee before dawn when Luke came in from checking on the horses, and instead of heading straight to the barn like usual, he poured himself a cup and sat down at the table. Can I ask you something? He said. Emily's defenses went up immediately. Depends on the question. Why'd you marry him? She should have expected it eventually. Should have prepared an answer that was simple and clean and didn't require explaining the desperate stupidity of a 17-year-old girl with no money and no options who thought a rich man's attention meant safety instead of ownership. I was young and broke, and he was neither of those things, Emily said. Seemed like a good trade at the time. When'd you figure out it wasn't the wedding night? The words came out before she could stop them, harsh and true, and edged with the kind of bitterness that 3 years hadn't softened. He told me what he expected from a wife, made it real clear that leaving wasn't an option, and when I tried anyway... Emily stopped herself. Luke didn't need to know about the hospital, about the lies she'd told doctors, about the way Marcus had smiled at her from the doorway, and said if she ever embarrassed him like that again, he'd make sure the next time she wouldn't survive it. Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then, my father used to beat my mother. Every time she stood up to him, every time she questioned his authority, every time she existed in a way he didn't approve of. She took it for 20 years before she finally left, and he tracked her down 3 days later and put a bullet through her skull before turning the gun on himself. The coffee in Emily's hand went cold. "Luke, I was 16. Found them both in the barn." His voice stayed level-controlled, like he was reciting facts instead of trauma. Spent the next 15 years learning how to recognize men like him. How to spot the ones who think violence is love and control is respect. Your ex-husband's that kind of man, Emily, and you're right to run from him. Then why help me? Why bring that danger here? Because somebody should have helped my mother, and maybe if they had, she'd still be alive. Luke met her eyes directly. I can't change what happened to her, but I can make damn sure history doesn't repeat itself on my property. Emily's throat felt tight. I'm not your responsibility. No, you're not, but you're here and that's enough. Something broke inside Emily's chest, not painfully, but like a dam releasing pressure that had been building for years. She'd spent so long believing she deserved what Marcus did that she'd made bad choices and had to live with the consequences that asking for help was weakness and accepting it was failure. But Luke wasn't offering to save her. He was offering to stand beside her while she saved herself, and that made all the difference. Thank you, she said quietly. Luke nodded once and stood up. Sun's coming up. Cattle need feeding. And just like that, the moment passed and they went back to work, but something had shifted between them that couldn't be undone. The 6th week, Emily started cooking dinner. It wasn't planned, wasn't discussed. She just came in from the barn one evening, and Luke was still out checking on a sick horse, and the kitchen felt empty and wrong. So she found ingredients, remembered recipes her mother had taught her before the cancer took her, and by the time Luke walked through the door, there was stew on the stove and bread in the oven, and the whole house smelled like something that might be called home. Luke stopped in the doorway. You didn't have to do this, I know, but I wanted to. They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Comfortable, almost companionable. And when Luke reached for seconds, Emily felt something warm settle in her chest that might have been happiness if she'd let herself name it. My mother made stew like this, Luke said. Haven't tasted it since she died. Was it good? Best thing I've ever eaten. He looked up at her. Until now, that warmth in Emily's chest spread lower, dangerous and unfamiliar and terrifying in its intensity. She stood up quickly, started clearing dishes, put distance between herself and whatever this feeling was before it could take root and ruin everything. But Luke's voice stopped her. Emily, you don't have to run from everything. I'm not running, I'm cleaning. You're scared. I'm practical. She turned to face him, and her voice came out sharper than intended. You've been kind to me, Luke. You've given me work and shelter and taught me how to survive here. But kindness has limits, and I'm not stupid enough to think this, she gestured between them, is anything more than temporary. Who said it was temporary? Everything's temporary. Everything ends. And the smart thing is to remember that before it hurts too much when it's over. Luke stood up slowly, and there was something in his expression that Emily couldn't read. Not anger, not disappointment, but a bone-deep weariness that matched her own. You're right, he said. Everything ends eventually. But most things don't end because they have to. They end because people get scared and run before anyone can leave them first. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. I'm not leaving, Emily, and I'm not asking you to stay forever. But I am asking you to stop running from the only good thing you've found in 3 years. He left her standing in the kitchen with dirty dishes and a chest full of feelings she didn't know how to process. And Emily pressed both hands against the counter and fought the urge to pack her bag and disappear into the night before this could get any more complicated. But she didn't. She finished the dishes, locked her bedroom door, and lay awake until dawn, wondering when exactly she'd stopped seeing Luke Hayes as a stranger who'd offered her temporary shelter, and started seeing him as someone who might understand what it meant to be broken and still keep breathing. The 7th week brought Marcus's lawyer to the ranch. Emily saw the car, first expensive black, too clean for Wyoming roads. She was in the barn mucking stalls when it pulled up, and every instinct she'd developed over 3 years of running told her to hide. But Luke's words echoed in her head. Stop running from the only good thing you've found. So she stayed. Stood in the barn doorway with a pitchfork in her hands and watched a man in a $1,000 suit climb out of the car and approach Luke with the kind of careful confidence that came from knowing the law was on his side. Mr. Hayes, my name is Gerald Patterson. I represent Marcus Brennan in a personal matter. Luke didn't shake the offered hand. If this is about the woman you've been hunting, you can save your breath. I told your thugs 2 weeks ago I haven't seen anyone. Come now, Mr. Hayes. We both know that's not entirely true. Patterson pulled out a folder from his briefcase. My client is willing to be generous. $20,000 for information leading to the return of his wife. $50,000 if you're the one who delivers her. She's not property. She is legally married to Mr. Brennan, which makes her location a matter of marital concern. The law is very clear on this. The law is also clear on domestic violence and unlawful imprisonment. Want to discuss which charges her husband's facing if she decides to press them? Patterson's smile didn't waver. Mrs. Brennan has made no such allegations to any legal authority. In the absence of formal complaints, these are simply rumors and speculation. Or maybe she's too terrified to press charges because your clients threaten to kill her if she talks. That's a serious accusation with no evidence to support it. Luke's voice went cold. Get off my property. Mr. Hayes, I understand your reluctance to become involved, but my client is a powerful man with significant resources. He's not going to stop looking for his wife, and anyone found harboring her could face legal consequences for interference with a marriage and potentially aiding in parental kidnapping. Emily felt ice flood her veins. What? Patterson turned toward the barn, and his smile widened when he saw her. Mrs. Brennan, how good to finally meet you. Emily, get back inside, Luke said, but she was already walking forward with the pitchfork still gripped in both hands. What did you mean, parental kidnapping? Ah, yes, your husband didn't tell you? Probably thought you'd come back on your own once the money ran out. Patterson pulled another document from his folder. You're pregnant, Mrs. Brennan. 3 months according to medical records from Denver General Hospital taken 2 days before you disappeared. Which means any child born from that pregnancy legally belongs to Mr. Brennan, and your current actions constitute custodial interference. The world tilted sideways. Emily's hands went numb, and the pitchfork clattered to the ground, and suddenly she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stare at this man in his expensive suit, telling her that Marcus had won after all. That's not possible, she whispered. I would have known. Apparently not. The records are quite clear. Which means you have a choice, Mrs. Brennan. You can return to your husband voluntarily, or we can involve law enforcement and make this significantly more difficult for everyone involved. She's not going anywhere with you, Luke said. Patterson shrugged. Then I'll return with the proper authorities. You have 24 hours to reconsider. He handed Luke a business card. For your sake, Mr. Hayes, I hope you make the right decision. Obstructing a legal custody matter carries serious penalties. He drove away, and Emily stood frozen in the yard with Luke's hand on her shoulder and the terrible understanding that everything she'd built here, the work, the trust, the fragile possibility of safety, had just collapsed into dust. I didn't know, she said. I swear I didn't know. Doesn't matter. We'll figure it out. Figure what out? He's right. If I'm pregnant, if there's a child, Marcus owns both of us. That's how the law works. Wives are property, and children are property, and I've spent 3 years running from something I can never escape. Emily, look at me. Luke turned her to face him, and his hands were steady on her shoulders, even though hers were shaking. You are not property. Neither is any child. And Marcus Brennan doesn't own a damn thing except his own cruelty. The law says different. Then we'll change the law, or we'll fight it, or we'll... Luke stopped, and something desperate flashed across his face. We'll get married. Emily's breath caught. What? If you're married to me, he's got no claim. The pregnancy doesn't matter, custody doesn't matter. You're my wife, not his, and he can take his lawyers and his money and his threats straight to hell. Luke, that's insane. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. But I'm offering anyway. His voice was rough with emotion. He wasn't quite hiding. You came here 3 weeks ago bleeding and scared, and I told you to stay. Well, I meant it. Not just for a month or until it gets complicated. I meant stay, Emily. However long you need. However long you want. And if putting a ring on your finger keeps you safe from that bastard, then that's what we do. Emily's eyes burned. You don't even know me. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know you're brave enough to face things that would break most people. I know you make stew that tastes like home, and you don't complain when the work's brutal, and you're learning to shoot because you refuse to be a victim anymore. Luke's grip tightened slightly. That's enough for me. Question is it enough for you? The smart thing would be to say no. To refuse to drag him deeper into her nightmare. To protect him the way no one had ever protected her. But Emily was tired of running. Tired of being smart. Tired of choosing survival over the possibility of something that might eventually be called living. Yes, she whispered. God help us both, but yes. Luke pulled her against his chest, and for the first time since she'd married Marcus Brennan 7 years ago, Emily let herself be held without flinching, without calculating escape routes, without waiting for gentleness to turn into violence. She just stood there and held on and tried not to think about what came next. They got married 3 days later in the Raven Ridge courthouse with a judge who didn't ask questions and 2 ranch hands Luke knew as witnesses. Emily wore the only dress she owned that wasn't torn or stained with work, and Luke wore clean jeans and a shirt he'd ironed himself, and the whole ceremony took less than 10 minutes. You may kiss the bride, the judge said. Luke looked at Emily. Emily looked at the floor. The silence stretched until the judge cleared his throat uncomfortably, and Luke said, "We'll save that for later," and signed the marriage certificate with a hand that was steadier than Emily's. Outside the courthouse, Luke turned to her. This is legal now. You're Emily Hayes. Marcus can't touch you. Unless he proves the marriage is fraudulent. Unless he convinces a judge this was coercion or conspiracy to circumvent custody laws. Then we make it real. Emily's heart kicked against her ribs. What does that mean? It means we live like we're married, share the house, share meals, build a life that looks legitimate to anyone watching. Luke's voice was careful, measured. But I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. Your room stays yours. I don't cross that threshold unless you invite me. And if I never invite you, then you never do, and we make this work anyway. Emily studied his face, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the hidden expectation that would eventually surface. But all she saw was the same straightforward honesty that had defined every interaction they'd had since the night he found her bleeding in the alley. Why are you doing this? She asked. Because somebody should have protected my mother, and nobody did. Because you deserve better than spending the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Because... Luke stopped and something complicated crossed his face. Because when you walked into my barn that first morning and demanded to know what work you'd be doing, I saw somebody who refused to stay broken. And I want to see what you become when you're finally safe enough to heal. Those words settled into Emily's chest like something solid and permanent, and for the first time since Marcus's lawyer had appeared 3 days ago, she felt like maybe she could breathe again. Okay, she said. We make it real. Making it real meant facing the pregnancy question she'd been avoiding since Patterson dropped that bomb. That evening, Emily drove into town alone, bought a test from a pharmacy where nobody knew her, and locked herself in the ranch house bathroom while Luke worked in the barn. 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. Emily sat on the edge of the bathtub with her hands pressed against her stomach and tried to imagine what it would mean if this was real, if Marcus had put a piece of himself inside her that she could never escape. The timer on her phone went off. Emily looked at the test. Negative. She looked again to be sure, held it up to the light, checked the package instructions twice. Still negative. Not pregnant. Never had been. Emily's legs went weak, and she sat down hard on the bathroom floor with her back against the wall and her face in her hands, and she didn't know whether to laugh or cry or scream. Marcus had lied. or his lawyer had lied, or the hospital records were faked manufactured evidence to force her back into a cage she'd barely escaped the first time. She was still sitting there when Luke knocked on the door. "Emily, you all right?" "I'm not pregnant." Her voice cracked. "The records were fake. Patterson lied to force my hand and we got married because of a lie." Silence from the other side of the door. Then, "Can I come in?" Emily unlocked the door but didn't stand up. Luke sat down on the floor beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, but not so close that she felt trapped. "So we got married for nothing," she said bitterly. "We got married because Marcus Brennan's a bastard who'll use any weapon he can find, and if the pregnancy didn't work, he'd have tried something else." Luke's voice was steady. "This changes nothing, Emily. You're still Emily Hayes. You're still safe here. And when Patterson comes back, and he will come back, we'll deal with it together. You don't have to stay married to me now. We can get it annulled. Say it was a mistake." "Is that what you want?" Emily turned to look at him, and the question in his eyes wasn't about obligation or duty or what made sense legally. It was something else entirely, something that terrified her more than Marcus ever had, because it required vulnerability instead of survival. "I don't know what I want," she said honestly. "I spent 7 years not being allowed to want anything except what Marcus decided I should want. And then 3 years running too fast to want anything except to stay alive. I don't know how to do this, Luke. How to be married or safe or anything except scared. Then we figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations, just two people trying to build something that doesn't hurt." It wasn't romantic. Wasn't the kind of declaration Emily had imagined as a girl before the world taught her that romance was just another word for control. But it was honest, and honest felt more valuable than any pretty lie. "Together," she repeated softly. Luke reached over and took her hand, and Emily let him. Patterson returned exactly when he said he would, but this time he brought the county sheriff and 3 of Marcus's men. Emily and Luke were in the barn when the vehicles pulled up, and this time there was nowhere to hide and no point in trying. "Stay behind me," Luke said quietly. "We're married now. I stand beside you, not behind you." Something fierce flashed in Luke's eyes, but he nodded, and they walked out together to face whatever came next. Patterson climbed out of the car with a smile that said he'd already won. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Brennan, or should I say Mrs. Hayes, I heard congratulations are in order." "Say what you came to say," Luke said. "My client is willing to overlook your recent marriage as the desperate act it clearly was. He's prepared to offer Mrs. Hayes a generous divorce settlement and full custody of any future children in exchange for her immediate return to Denver." "Not interested," Emily said. "Then perhaps you'll be interested in this." Patterson handed a document to the sheriff. A warrant for Emily Brennan's arrest on charges of theft, fraud, and destruction of property. It seems before leaving Denver, Mrs. Brennan helped herself to several valuable items from the marital home, including jewelry worth approximately $50,000 and sensitive business documents belonging to Mr. Brennan's railroad company. Emily's stomach dropped. "That's not true. I didn't take anything except my clothes." "The evidence suggests otherwise. A safety deposit box registered in your name containing the missing items was discovered last week by Denver police. You're being extradited to Colorado to face charges." Luke stepped forward. "She's been here for 2 months. How could she have accessed a safety deposit box in Denver?" "The box was opened 3 years ago, Mr. Hayes, shortly before Mrs. Brennan disappeared. The investigation has been ongoing since then. It was brilliant and brutal, and exactly the kind of thing Marcus would do. Plant evidence, manufacture charges, use the legal system as a weapon to force her compliance." Emily had spent 3 years running from violence, but this was a different kind of threat entirely. This was prison-time criminal record, the complete destruction of any future she might build. "I want a lawyer," she said. "Of course, but first you'll need to come with us." The sheriff stepped forward, handcuffs already in hand, and his expression said he was just doing his job and didn't much care about the truth either way. "Wait!" Luke's voice cut through the moment like breaking glass. "If Emily's been here 2 months, and the box was accessed 3 years ago, Then she's been living here longer than she's been missing from Denver. Which means she's a Wyoming resident, not a Colorado fugitive. And Wyoming doesn't extradite on civil matters without a full hearing. Patterson's smile faltered slightly. The warrant clearly states, the warrant assumes jurisdiction that hasn't been established. Sheriff, unless you've got proof that box was accessed recently, you're arresting a Wyoming resident on 3-year-old charges that haven't been adjudicated. That's going to look real bad in court when her lawyer argues unlawful detention. The sheriff hesitated, looked at Patterson, looked at Emily. That true? You've been here 2 months. I've been working this ranch since early spring. You can check with anyone in town who's seen me. Actually, nobody in town's seen her, Patterson said smoothly. Which suggests Mrs. Hayes has been hiding from legal authorities, which supports probable cause for arrest. She's been working a ranch, not hiding from authorities. There's a difference. Luke turned to the sheriff. Bill, you've known me 15 years. Have I ever given you reason to think I'm harboring a criminal to... The sheriff, Bill, apparently looked uncomfortable. No, Luke, you haven't. But this warrant's signed by a judge in Colorado, and I can't just ignore that. You can hold it for 24 hours while we get Emily legal representation and file a motion to dismiss. That's within your authority. It's also within my authority to arrest her now and sort it out later. Then you do what you have to do, and I'll call every newspaper between here and Denver and tell them about the sheriff who arrested a domestic violence victim on trumped-up charges manufactured by her abusive ex-husband. Luke's voice went cold and hard. That the kind of press you want 6 months before your re-election? The silence stretched tight as wire. Bill's face reddened. Patterson's smile disappeared entirely, and Emily held her breath, waiting for everything to collapse. Finally, Bill said, 24 hours. But Emily stays in Raven Ridge, doesn't leave town, and checks in with my office twice a day. That's not negotiable. Done, Luke said immediately. Patterson looked like he wanted to argue, but Bill was already walking back to his car, and the moment had passed. Patterson turned to Emily with a look of pure venom. This is a delay, not a victory. Mr. Brennan always gets what he wants, Mrs. Hayes. Always. And when he's finished with you, there won't be enough left to bury. Then he was gone, and Emily's legs finally gave out, and she sat down hard in the dirt with her head between her knees, while Luke knelt beside her. Breathe, he said. Just breathe. He's going to win. He's going to keep coming until I break or die or go back, and there's nothing we can do to stop him. There's always something we can do. We just have to be smarter than he is. He's got money and lawyers and evidence he manufactured, and I've got nothing except a marriage license and 24 hours before I'm arrested. You've got me. Luke's voice was fierce. And I've got friends who owe me favors, and a judge in Cheyenne who doesn't like railroad men throwing their weight around, and the deed to this ranch that's worth enough to hire the kind of lawyer who eats bastards like Marcus Brennan for breakfast. Emily looked up at him. You'd risk your ranch for this. I'd risk everything for this. For you. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, and something inside Emily's chest cracked wide open. Why? She whispered. Because you're my wife, and that means something to me, even if it started as a legal maneuver. Luke reached out and brushed dirt from her cheek with surprising gentleness. Because watching you learn to be strong again is the best thing I've seen in 15 years. Because when you smile, which isn't often enough, it feels like the sun coming out after a long winter. Because, don't. Emily's voice broke. Don't make this about feelings. Don't make it complicated. It's already complicated, Emily. Has been since the day you walked into my life bleeding and defiant. The only question is whether we admit it or keep pretending this is just practical. Practical is safer. Practical is lonely, and I've been lonely long enough. The honesty in those words hit Emily harder than any declaration of love could have. This wasn't romance. This wasn't the fairy tale she'd stopped believing in 7 years ago. This was two broken people recognizing each other's damage and deciding that maybe, just maybe, they could build something functional out of the pieces. I don't know how to do this, she said again. Neither do I. But we've got 24 hours to figure out our next move, and I'm not wasting them being scared. Luke stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, we've got a lawyer to find and a fight to plan." Emily took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, and for the first time since Marcus's lawyer had appeared, she felt something besides fear settle into her bones. It wasn't hope exactly. Hope felt too fragile, too easy to break. But it was determination, and determination had kept her alive this long. They spent the rest of the day on the phone. Luke called in favors from friends who knew lawyers, friends who knew judges, friends who dealt with railroad corruption and knew how Marcus Brennan operated. Emily sat beside him and listened to him build a defense from nothing, and she realized something that should have been obvious weeks ago. Luke Hayes wasn't just kind or honest or protective. He was dangerous in his own right, smart and connected, and willing to fight dirty when the situation required it. He'd just hidden it under a layer of ranch work and quiet competence waiting for the moment it was needed. By evening, they had a lawyer, Rachel Mendez, a woman in Cheyenne who'd made her reputation destroying abusive husbands in divorce court, and a plan that was risky but possible. Rachel would file an emergency motion to dismiss the warrant based on jurisdictional issues and lack of evidence. She'd argue Marcus had manufactured the charges to circumvent custody laws and force Emily's return. And if that failed, she'd threaten to countersue for harassment, defamation, and unlawful prosecution. "It's going to be expensive," Rachel said over the phone. $5,000 just to file the motion, another $10 if it goes to trial." "How fast can you get started?" Luke asked. "Money first, then I move." Luke looked at Emily. Emily looked at the phone. They both knew what $5,000 meant on a ranch that barely turned a profit. "I'll have the money to you by morning," Luke said, and hung up before Rachel could respond. "Luke, you can't." "I can and I will. This ranch is worth $100,000 if I sell it, $50,000 if I mortgage it. $5,000's nothing compared to keeping you out of prison." "But this is your home, your life, everything your mother left you." "My mother left me the understanding that some things matter more than property. You matter more than property, Emily. And if Marcus Brennan thinks he can buy justice, he's about to learn that there are still people in this world who won't sell out for any price." Emily's eyes burned. "I don't know how to repay you for this." "Then don't. Just stay. Keep working the ranch. Keep learning to be strong. Keep existing in a way that proves bastards like Marcus don't get to win." Luke's voice softened. "That's all the payment I need." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed with the door locked and listened to the house settle around her. And all she could think about was the fact that Luke Hayes had risked everything he owned for a woman he'd known less than 3 months. That he'd married her to protect her, mortgaged his future to defend her, and asked for nothing in return, except that she stay alive and keep fighting. Nobody had ever done that before. Not her father, not her friends, certainly not Marcus. Men took from Emily. They used her and hurt her and demanded she give more than she had to give. But Luke just kept offering without expecting anything back, and Emily didn't know what to do with that kind of generosity. Around midnight, she heard his door open, and footsteps moved down the hall. For a moment, panic flared. Was this when the kindness stopped and the expectations started? But the footsteps went past her door and stopped in the kitchen. Water running. A cabinet opening and closing. Emily lay there for 5 minutes telling herself to stay put, to let him handle his insomnia alone. Then she got up, pulled on a robe, and walked into the kitchen before she could talk herself out of it. Luke was sitting at the table with a glass of water and the deed to the ranch spread out in front of him. He looked up when Emily entered, and the exhaustion on his face made him look older than his 36 years. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Thinking about what comes next if Rachel's motion fails. You sell the ranch and we run. Together this time. Is that what you want to keep running?" Emily sat down across from him. "I want to stop being scared. I want to stop looking over my shoulder and second-guessing every decision and waiting for everything to fall apart. But I don't know if that's possible as long as Marcus is alive." "Then maybe we stop playing defense and start playing offense." "What does that mean?" Luke's expression was harder than Emily had ever seen it. "It means we find out what Marcus is really hiding." Railroad men don't get rich without breaking laws, and if he's manufacturing evidence against you, he's got skeletons buried somewhere. We dig them up and use them. That's dangerous. So is waiting for him to destroy us. Luke leaned forward. Emily, I've spent 15 years living small and quiet because I was afraid of turning into my father. Afraid that fighting back meant becoming violent, that standing up for something meant losing control. But watching you face down Marcus's men with a pitchfork in your hands taught me something important. There's a difference between being violent and refusing to be a victim. And I'm done being a victim of my own fear. Emily reached across the table and put her hand over his. Then we fight, but we do it smart, and we do it together. And if it goes wrong, it won't go wrong. If it goes wrong, Emily repeated firmly, you let me take the fall. This is my fight, Luke, not yours. And I won't let you lose everything because of me. Too late. Already lost it the day I decided to help you. Luke turned his hand over so their palms pressed together. But I don't regret it. Not for a second. They sat there in the darkness, holding hands like teenagers who didn't know what came next. And Emily felt something shift inside her chest. Not love, she wasn't ready to call it love, but the beginning of trust that went deeper than survival. The kind of trust that said, maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face this alone anymore. Luke, yeah, thank you. For everything. For believing me when nobody else would. For standing beside me when it would have been easier to walk away. For Emily's voice caught. For being the first good man I've ever known. Luke's grip tightened slightly. You're welcome. But Emily, you being here working this ranch building a life from nothing, that's made me remember what it feels like to have something worth protecting. So thank you too. They stayed like that until the first light of dawn started creeping through the kitchen window. And when they finally let go and went back to their separate rooms, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. The possibility that tomorrow might be better than today. Rachel's motion was denied before noon. The call came while Emily and Luke were in the barn repairing the fence Marcus's men had cut. And Emily knew from Luke's expression before he even said the words that they'd lost this round. Judge ruled the warrant stands, said jurisdictional issues don't override the severity of the charges. Luke set down his phone with controlled precision. You've got until 5 o'clock to turn yourself in or Bill's coming out here with a full arrest. Emily's hands went numb around the wire cutters. So that's it, Marcus wins. No, that's just round 1. Luke pulled out his phone again. Rachel said she's filing an appeal, but that takes time we don't have, which means we go to Plan B. What's Plan B? We prove Marcus manufactured the evidence. Rachel's got a private investigator in Denver who owes her a favor, former cop who hates railroad corruption. If there's dirt on Marcus, he'll find it. In 6 hours. In however long it takes. But first, Luke's expression went hard. You need to call Marcus. Emily's stomach lurched. What? Call him. Tell him you're turning yourself in at 5. Make him think he's won. Luke started pacing, and Emily recognized the shift in him from rancher to strategist. He's been playing this smart, staying behind lawyers and hired men. But if he thinks you're coming back to him, he'll get sloppy. Brag to the wrong person, let something slip. Give us ammunition. You want me to lie to him? I want you to survive. And that means using every weapon we've got, including his own arrogance. Emily's hands shook as she pulled out the phone she'd been carrying for 3 months without ever turning it on. The phone Marcus had given her on their wedding day with explicit instructions never to use it for anything except calling him. She'd kept it because throwing it away felt too much like admitting defeat, but she'd never imagined actually using it. She turned it on. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, all from the same number. I can't do this, she whispered. Luke crouched down in front of her. Yes, you can. You've survived 3 years of running. You've rebuilt yourself from nothing. You can handle 5 minutes on the phone with a bastard who doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. What if he hears it in my voice? What if he knows I'm lying? Then you lie better. You've been pretending to be fine for 7 years, Emily. Pretend one more time. Emily pressed the call button before she could change her mind. Marcus answered on the second ring. I knew you'd call eventually. His voice was exactly as she remembered, smooth, confident, the tone of a man who'd never been told no in his entire life. Hearing it made Emily's skin crawl and her chest tighten, and every instinct she had screamed to hang up. I'm turning myself in, she said. 5 o'clock at the sheriff's office in Raven Ridge. Smart decision. I'll have Patterson meet you there with the paperwork. What paperwork? Divorce settlement. You sign it, drop the charges against yourself, come home, and we can put this unfortunate episode behind us. Emily's grip on the phone tightened. I'm not coming home, Marcus. I'm going to jail if necessary, but I'm not coming back to you. Don't be dramatic. You sign the papers, we tell the authorities it was all a misunderstanding, and you're free to go wherever you want. I just need you to admit publicly that the theft charges were unfounded. Something in his tone didn't match his words. Marcus never gave anything without getting more in return, and freedom wasn't his style. Emily glanced at Luke, who was listening intently, and made a decision. Why do you care about the theft charges? You've got me arrested either way. Because... Marcus stopped himself, and Emily heard the shift in his voice from confident to careful. Because I'd rather not have my wife's criminal behavior become public record. It's embarrassing for both of us. That's not it. Emily's mind raced. You need me to recant, which means whatever evidence you planted in that safety deposit box is too obvious. Someone's going to trace it back to you, and you need me to take the fall before that happens. Silence on the other end of the line. Then Marcus laughed low and cold. You've gotten smarter, Emily. I like that. But it doesn't change the situation. You're going to sign those papers and recant your story, or I'll make sure you spend the next 10 years in a Colorado prison. Your choice. I'd rather spend 10 years in prison than one more day with you. Then you're a fool. But I'll give you until 5 to reconsider. After that, the offer expires, and you get exactly what you deserve. He hung up. Emily set down the phone with shaking hands and looked at Luke. He's scared. He needs me to recant because the evidence connects back to him somehow. She stood up, pacing now. Which means there's proof he planted it. We just need to find it before 5 o'clock. Rachel's investigator is already looking. But Emily... Luke's voice was gentle. Even if we find proof, that doesn't mean the charges disappear. It just means we've got leverage. Then we use that leverage to destroy him. Find out what he's hiding, threaten to expose it unless he drops everything and leaves me alone. That's blackmail. That's survival. And I'm done playing by rules Marcus never followed in the first place. Luke studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. Then we fight dirty. Rachel's investigator, a man named Tom Chen, who'd spent 20 years in Denver PD before quitting over corruption, called at 2 o'clock with the first piece of the puzzle. The safety deposit box was opened by someone named Jennifer Walsh, Tom said over the phone. Paid clerk to look the other way, used a fake ID with Emily's information. Clerk remembers her because Walsh was nervous, kept checking her watch, acted like she was being followed. Who's Jennifer Walsh? Emily asked. Don't know yet, but I pulled security footage from the bank. Woman's in her 30s, blonde professional. And here's the interesting part, she left in a car registered to Brennan Railroad Company. Luke and Emily exchanged looks. Marcus sent someone to plant the evidence, Luke said. That's my guess. But proving it requires finding Walsh and getting her to testify, which isn't happening in 3 hours. Tom paused. However, I did find something else. Brennan's been buying up land along the proposed Northern Railroad route. Problem is, most of that land belongs to ranchers who won't sell. So he's been using shell companies and legal intimidation to force them out. That's not news, Luke said. Everyone knows Marcus plays dirty with land deals. But what everyone doesn't know is that 3 of those ranchers have filed complaints with the state attorney general about fraud and coercion. Complaints that mysteriously disappeared from official records last month. I've got copies. Emily's breath caught. You're saying Marcus is bribing state officials to cover up criminal complaints? I'm saying somebody is. And if we can prove it's him, that's federal corruption charges. Rail companies fall under interstate commerce laws, which means this goes way beyond your theft case. How fast can you get that evidence to Rachel? Luke asked. Already sent it. She's drafting a motion as we speak. But Emily... Tom's voice turned serious. If Marcus finds out you've got this information, he's going to escalate. Men like him don't go down quietly. Let him escalate, Emily said. I'm done being scared. She hung up and turned to Luke, and the look on her face must have worried him because he immediately crossed the room and took both her hands in his. We're going to make him pay for what he did to you, Luke said. I promise you that. I don't want him to pay. I want him gone, out of my life completely and permanently. Emily's voice was steady cold. And if that means destroying his company and his reputation and everything he's built on the backs of people he's hurt, then that's exactly what we're going to do. Luke searched her face. You sure about this? Once we go after him with this kind of ammunition, there's no backing down. He'll come at us with everything he's got. Then let him come. I've been running for 3 years, and all it's done is give him more time to hurt other people. Maybe it's time I stopped running and started fighting back. Something shifted in Luke's expression. Pride maybe, or respect, or the recognition that the broken woman who'd stumbled onto his ranch 8 weeks ago had become someone capable of facing down her demons. He pulled her closer, and this time, Emily didn't flinch or pull away. She just stood there and let herself be held, and it felt less like weakness and more like choosing to trust someone with the parts of herself that Marcus had tried to destroy. Together, Luke said quietly against her hair. Together, Emily agreed. At 4:30, Rachel called with news that changed everything. I filed an emergency motion with the federal district court arguing that Emily's arrest is connected to ongoing criminal activity by Marcus Brennan. Attached Tom's evidence about the bribery and the rancher's complaints. Judge issued a temporary stay on the arrest warrant pending investigation. Emily's knees went weak. So I don't have to turn myself in. Not today. But Emily, this just made things a lot more complicated. Federal investigators are going to want to interview you. Marcus is going to know we've got dirt on him, and his next move won't be legal maneuvers. It'll be something worse. Let it be worse. At least now we're fighting on even ground. There's no even ground when one side has unlimited money and no conscience. You and Luke need to be careful. Watch your backs, don't go anywhere alone, and if anything feels wrong, call the police immediately. They promised they would and hung up, and Emily turned to Luke with something like triumph burning in her chest. We did it. We actually bought ourselves time. We bought a stay of execution. That's different from winning. But Luke was smiling despite the warning in his words. Still, I'll take it. And Emily... He paused, something shifting in his expression. You were incredible on that phone with Marcus. Strong and smart, and refusing to back down. That's the woman I married. The words hung between them heavier than they should have been, because they both knew this marriage had started as a legal maneuver, and was becoming something neither of them had planned for. Luke, about that, don't. His voice was soft but firm. Don't analyze it or explain it away or apologize for it. We got married to protect you, yes. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that, at least for me. And if you're not there yet, that's fine. I can wait. But I need you to know that when I said those vows, I meant them. Emily's throat felt tight. I don't know how to do this, how to be married or safe or anything except constantly waiting for the next disaster. Then we learned together. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people figuring out what it means to build something that doesn't hurt. It was the same thing he'd said in the bathroom after the pregnancy test, and Emily realized that Luke had been saying the same thing in different ways since the day they met. I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone. We'll figure this out together. I'm scared, she admitted. Of Marcus or of this? Both. All of it. I'm scared that Marcus will find a way to hurt you because of me. I'm scared that I'm too broken to ever be what you deserve. I'm scared that if I let myself trust this trust, it'll turn out to be another trap, and I won't survive it this time." Luke stepped closer, and his voice was gentle but unyielding. "Emily, look at me." She did. His eyes were steady, honest, holding hers with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "I can't promise you that Marcus won't try to hurt me. I can't promise that everything will work out perfectly. But I can promise you this: I will never use your trust against you. I will never ask you to be anything except exactly who you are. And I will stand beside you through whatever comes next, whether that's legal battles or worse, because that's what marriage means to me. Not obligation, not duty, partnership. Even if I can't—" Emily stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Even if I can't give you everything a wife should give a husband." Understanding dawned in Luke's eyes, and his expression softened. "Are you asking if I expect you to share my bed?" Emily nodded, unable to speak past the fear clogging her throat. This was the conversation she'd been avoiding since the day they got married, the expectation she'd been waiting for Luke to voice the demand that would prove he was just like every other man who'd ever claimed to care about her. But Luke just smiled, sad and gentle, and completely without pressure. "Emily, I don't expect anything from you except honesty and partnership. If you're never ready to share a bed, then we don't share a bed. If it takes you 10 years to feel safe enough to try, then I'll wait 10 years. And if you decide you never want that kind of intimacy with me," his voice was steady, certain, "then we build a marriage without it. Because what I want isn't your body or some idea of what a wife should be. What I want is you, Emily. Exactly as you are, with all your fears and damage and strength. That's enough for me. More than enough." The words broke something inside Emily's chest. Something that had been holding tight since Marcus first taught her that love was just another word for ownership. Tears burned in her eyes, and she hated crying, hated showing weakness. But Luke's face was blurring, and her throat was closing, and suddenly she was sobbing against his chest while he held her, and didn't ask questions, or demand explanations, or try to fix her. He just stood there and let her cry until she had nothing left. "I don't deserve you," Emily whispered finally. "Yes, you do. You deserve someone who sees your strength instead of trying to break it, who respects your boundaries instead of pushing past them, who understands that healing takes time and doesn't rush you through it." Luke's arms tightened slightly. "And maybe I deserve someone who's teaching me how to be brave again after 15 years of hiding from my own life. So let's call it even." Emily laughed, despite herself, watery and broken, but real. "Even," she agreed. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, holding each other, and Emily felt something shift in her understanding of what marriage could be. Not ownership or obligation or the slow erosion of self that Marcus had taught her, but partnership built on respect and honesty and the willingness to fight for each other without demanding sacrifice in return. That evening they cooked dinner together, Emily making stew while Luke baked bread using his mother's recipe, and the kitchen felt less like a workspace and more like something that might eventually be called home. They ate in comfortable silence, cleaned up side by side, and Emily found herself watching Luke's hands as he dried dishes and wondering what it would be like to reach out and take one. She didn't, not yet, but the fact that she wanted to felt like progress. Around 9 o'clock, Luke's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered on speaker. "Mr. Hayes, this is Fletcher, Mr. Brennan's associate. We met a few weeks back." Luke's expression went cold. "I remember. What do you want?" "Just calling to let you know that temporary stay your lawyer got. It's going to be gone by morning. My employer has friends in high places, and they don't appreciate federal investigators snooping around asking uncomfortable questions. Then your employer shouldn't have committed federal crimes." Fletcher laughed ugly and mean. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to convince your wife to sign those papers and recant her story. In exchange, Mr. Brennan will forget about the trouble you've caused and let you keep your ranch. If you don't—" The threat hung in the air. "Well, accidents happen. Fires start. People disappear. Would be a shame if something happened to that pretty little spread of yours." Luke's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "You threatening me, Fletcher?" "Just stating facts. You've got until midnight to make the right choice." The line went dead. Emily and Luke looked at each other, and Emily saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. "He's going to burn down the ranch," she said. "Maybe. Or maybe he's bluffing, trying to scare us into compliance." "Marcus doesn't bluff." Emily stood up, pacing. "He's done with legal methods. This is what happens when he doesn't get his way. He escalates until something breaks or someone dies. Then we call the sheriff, tell him about the threat, and say what? That we got a phone call from someone who didn't explicitly threaten us. Marcus's lawyers will claim it was a misunderstanding and will look paranoid." Emily's mind raced. "We need to get ahead of this. Figure out what Marcus really wants and use it against him before he can hurt us. What he wants is you. Everything else is just leverage to get you back." "No." Emily stopped pacing, something clicking into place. "That's what I thought too, but it doesn't make sense. If he just wanted me back, he'd have grabbed me the first time his men came here. This isn't about me. It's about something bigger." "The railroad route," Luke said slowly. "The land deals. The bribery. If federal investigators start looking into Marcus's business, they'll find evidence that ties him to corruption across 3 states. That's not just civil charges. That's prison time. And I'm the only witness who can prove he's been using violence and intimidation to get what he wants." Emily's pulse quickened. "He doesn't want me back. He wants me dead or discredited. The marriage, the custody claims, the theft charges, all of it was just about destroying my credibility so nobody would believe me if I testified." The realization hit them both at the same time. They weren't fighting a man trying to reclaim his wife. They were fighting a criminal trying to silence a witness. "We need to leave," Luke said. "Right now. Pack what we need and disappear until Rachel can get you into protective custody." "Running didn't work for 3 years. Why would it work now?" "Because now we know what we're up against. And Emily," Luke's voice was urgent, "if Marcus is willing to kill you to protect his empire, he won't stop until he succeeds. Please, let's just go." Emily looked at the ranch house that had become more of a home in 8 weeks than anywhere she'd lived in the past 7 years, at the man who'd risked everything to protect her without asking for anything in return, at the life they'd started to build from broken pieces and stubborn hope. "No," she said quietly. "I'm done running. If Marcus wants a fight, he can come here and face me directly. And if he sends his men instead—" Emily walked to the cabinet where Luke kept his rifles and pulled one down. "Then we'll be ready for them." "Emily." "I mean it, Luke. I've been a victim long enough. Tonight I choose to be something else." Luke looked at her for a long moment, and Emily saw the exact instant he made his decision. He crossed to the cabinet and pulled down his own rifle, checked the ammunition, and turned to face her with grim determination. "Then we make a stand, together. But Emily—" His voice was soft. "No matter what happens tonight, I need you to know something. Don't say goodbye like we're not going to survive this." "I'm not saying goodbye. I'm saying—" Luke set down his rifle and took both her hands. "I'm saying that meeting you was the best thing that's happened to me in 15 years. That watching you become strong again reminded me what strength looks like. That somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of you as someone I was helping and started thinking of you as the woman I want to spend the rest of my life beside. And if tonight's the night Marcus makes his move, I want you to know that I don't regret a single moment of it." Emily's eyes burned. "Luke, and I know you're not ready to hear this, might never be ready, but I'm going to say it anyway because tomorrow's not promised, and I'm tired of being afraid." Luke's voice shook slightly. "I love you, Emily Hayes. Not because you need saving, or because I'm trying to fix you, but because you're brave and honest, and stronger than anyone I've ever met. And regardless of how tonight ends, I need you to know that." The words hit Emily like physical blows, overwhelming and terrifying and beautiful. Nobody had ever said them and meant them, not Marcus, with his possessive demands, not her father, with his absent affection, not anyone. And here was Luke offering them without conditions or expectations, just honest truth that asked for nothing in return. "I don't know what to say," Emily whispered. "Then don't say anything. Just know it's true." He picked up his rifle and headed toward the door to check the perimeter, leaving Emily standing in the kitchen with her hands shaking and her heart pounding, and the terrible, beautiful knowledge that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to love him back. They didn't come at midnight like Fletcher promised. They came at 2 in the morning, when exhaustion made people careless and darkness covered sins. Emily heard the trucks first. She'd been sitting in the kitchen with her rifle across her lap, and her eyes on the window, and the sound of engines cutting through the silence made her heart kick hard against her ribs. 3 sets of headlights coming up the long drive, moving slow and deliberate, like predators who knew their prey was cornered. "Luke?" she called quietly. He appeared from the hallway where he'd been watching the back approach rifle in hand, and expression hard. "How many?" "3 trucks, maybe 9 men." Emily stood up, checking her ammunition for the 3rd time in an hour. "They're not even trying to hide it, because they don't think we'll fight back." Luke moved to the window beside her. "Or because they don't care if we do." The truck stopped 50 yards from the house, close enough to be threatening, but far enough to stay out of easy rifle range. Doors opened, and men climbed out, and Emily recognized Fletcher's bulk even in the darkness. But the others were new hired muscle, probably brought in from Denver or Cheyenne, for the kind of work Marcus's regular men wouldn't touch. "We could call the sheriff," Emily said. "By the time he gets here, the house will be burning and we'll be dead, or worse." Luke's voice was steady despite the fear Emily could hear underneath. "We do this ourselves, or we don't survive it." Fletcher's voice carried across the yard, amplified and mocking. "Mr. Hayes, why don't you and the lady come on out, and we can settle this like civilized people?" Luke opened the window just wide enough to shout back, "Get off my property before I start shooting." "Now that's not very neighborly. Mr. Brennan just wants to talk to his wife. You send her out, we leave peaceful. Nobody gets hurt." "She's not his wife anymore. She's mine. And she's not going anywhere." Fletcher laughed, and the sound made Emily's skin crawl. "Your funeral, cowboy. Or should I say, your fire." One of the men pulled something from the back of a truck. Emily's blood went cold when she recognized the shaped gasoline cans, at least 6 of them. "They're going to burn us out," she said. "Not if we stop them first." Luke raised his rifle, sighted through the scope. "Emily, when I fire, you run for the barn. Get the horses out and ride for town. Don't stop, don't look back. I'm not leaving you. You have to. One of us needs to survive this to testify against Marcus, and that can't be me." "Then it won't be either of us." Emily raised her own rifle. "You taught me how to shoot Luke. You don't get to bench me now." Before Luke could argue, Fletcher gave the order, and 3 men started walking toward the house with gas cans in their hands. Luke fired first, the shot shattering the night and sending all 3 men diving for cover. Emily fired second, her bullet punching through the hood of the nearest truck. "That's your warning," Luke shouted. "Next one's through flesh." Fletcher's response was to pull his own gun and start firing at the house. Glass exploded inward, and Emily hit the floor as bullets tore through the kitchen walls. Luke returned fire, and someone screamed, not a death scream, but a pain scream, which meant Luke had aimed to wound instead of kill. "Fall back." Emily grabbed Luke's arm and pulled him toward the hallway as more bullets ripped through the walls. "We can't hold the kitchen." They retreated to Luke's bedroom at the back of the house, where the walls were thicker and the windows smaller. Emily's hands were shaking and her ears were ringing from gunfire, and somewhere in the distance she could hear sirens. Maybe the sheriff responding to shots fired, maybe just wishful thinking. "This is insane," she gasped. "We're outgunned and outnumbered, and they're going to burn the house down around us. Then we make them pay for every inch." Luke was checking his ammunition, his face set in grim determination. "Emily, listen to me. If this goes bad, if I go down, you take my truck and you drive straight to Rachel's office in Cheyenne. She'll know what to do. Stop talking like you're going to die. One of us might, and I need you to promise me that if it's me, you'll keep fighting. You'll testify against Marcus, and you'll destroy him, and you'll live the life you deserve." Emily's throat was tight. "I promise, but Luke..." She reached out and grabbed his hand. "It's not going to be you. Because I finally figured out what I want, and I'm not losing it before I get the chance to tell you." Luke's eyes met hers. "Emily." The explosion cut him off. Something detonated on the far side of the house, not gasoline, but something bigger, something that shook the walls and sent dust raining from the ceiling. Emily's ears rang and Luke was pulling her to her feet and shouting something she couldn't hear over the noise. Then the door crashed open and two men were inside the room and Emily was raising her rifle, but Luke was faster, firing twice and dropping both men before they could get a shot off. Blood splattered the floor and Emily's stomach lurched, but she didn't have time to process it because more men were coming and the house was filling with smoke. "Out the window!" Luke smashed the glass with his rifle butt and gestured for Emily to go first. "Move." Emily climbed through and hit the ground hard, rolled to her feet with her rifle raised, just as another man came around the corner. She fired without thinking, and he went down clutching his leg, and the shock of what she'd done nearly paralyzed her before Luke dropped beside her and grabbed her arm. "Don't stop, run!" They ran for the barn, with bullets kicking up dirt around their feet and smoke pouring from the house behind them. Emily's lungs burned and her legs felt like lead, but Luke was beside her, and that was enough to keep moving. They crashed through the barn doors, and Luke slammed them shut, threw the bolt, and immediately started saddling horses. "We're not running," Emily said. "We're regrouping. There's a difference." Luke handed her the reins to the mare she'd been riding for weeks. "We get to high ground, we have better sight lines. We turn defense into offense. Or we call for help and wait for the cavalry. The cavalry's not coming, Emily. Not fast enough to matter. It's us or nobody." Before Emily could respond, her phone rang. She pulled it from her pocket, saw Marcus's name on the screen, and answered without thinking. "Are you watching this?" Marcus's voice was calm, almost pleasant. "From wherever you're hiding, can you see your husband's ranch burning?" Emily looked back at the house. Flames were visible now, orange light against black sky smoke billowing into the night. Everything Luke owned, everything his mother had left him, going up in fire because of her. "You bastard," she whispered. "I gave you a choice, Emily. I always give people choices. You chose poorly." Marcus paused. "But I'm a reasonable man. I'll make you one more offer. Come back to Denver with me tonight. Sign the papers. Tell the authorities this was all a misunderstanding, and I'll let your cowboy live." "Why would I believe you?" "Because killing him serves no purpose if you're already back where you belong. He's leverage, Emily. That's all. Give me what I want, and he's worthless to me." Emily's mind raced. Marcus was lying. He had to be lying. It's what he did, but what if he wasn't? What if surrendering was the only way to save Luke's life? Luke was watching her face. "Don't," he said quietly. "Whatever he's offering, don't take it. He says he'll let you live if I go back." "And you believe him?" "No. But what if I'm wrong?" Emily's voice cracked. "Luke, I can't watch you die because of me. I can't." "Then don't watch. Just trust me to handle this." Luke took the phone from her hand. "Brennan, this is Luke Hayes. You want Emily. Come get her yourself instead of sending your dogs to do your work." Marcus laughed. "You think I'm stupid enough to put myself in harm's way? I'm a businessman, Mr. Hayes. I delegate unpleasant tasks to people who specialize in them. You're a coward who hides behind money and hired guns. And when the federal investigators finish digging into your business, you're going to spend the rest of your life in a prison cell, watching your empire collapse." Bold words from a man whose house is currently burning down. But I'll tell you what, I'm feeling generous. You've got 5 minutes to send Emily out. After that, my men torch the barn with both of you inside. Your choice. The line went dead. Luke handed the phone back to Emily, and their eyes met in the dim light filtering through the barn boards. "I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself," Emily said. "And I'm not letting you go back to him. So we're at an impasse." Luke checked his rifle again, his movements mechanical and precise. "Unless we do something neither of us wants to do." "What's that?" "We stop playing defense. We go after Fletcher and his men directly. Hit them hard enough that they retreat or surrender." "That's suicide. So is waiting for them to burn us alive." Luke's expression was harder than Emily had ever seen it. I spent 15 years being afraid of becoming my father, afraid that fighting meant losing control. But Emily, watching you face down every threat Marcus threw at you, taught me something important. Fighting back doesn't make you a monster. It makes you someone who refuses to be a victim. And I'm done being a victim. Emily understood then what he was really saying. This wasn't just about survival. This was about Luke finally confronting the fear that had defined his life since his parents died. About choosing to stand and fight instead of hiding from the possibility of violence. "Then we fight," she said. "Together. But Luke, if we survive this, there's something I need to tell you." "Tell me after, when we're both still breathing." They mounted the horses, and Luke kicked open the barn doors, and Emily's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might explode as they rode out into the smoke and firelight with rifles raised and the determination to end this one way or another. What happened next felt like it lasted hours, but probably took less than 5 minutes. Luke rode straight at the nearest group of men and fired before they could react, scattering them like startled birds. Emily flanked right and took out the man holding the gas cans with a shot that grazed his shoulder and made him drop everything. Fletcher shouted orders, but his men were panicking now, not expecting their victims to fight back with this kind of organized aggression. Then headlights flooded the yard, not more of Marcus's men, but 3 sheriff's vehicles, and behind them a black SUV with federal plates. Bill jumped out with his gun drawn and his voice cutting through the chaos. "Everyone on the ground now!" Fletcher and his men dropped their weapons and hit the dirt. Emily and Luke stayed, mounted rifles lowered, but ready, and Emily's whole body was shaking from adrenaline and terror and the impossible realization that they'd survived. A woman climbed out of the federal SUV, late 40s, dressed in tactical gear, carrying herself with the kind of authority that came from years of putting bad men in prison. "Emily Hayes." Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. "Special Agent Sarah Morrison, FBI. We've been investigating Marcus Brennan's business practices for 6 months. Your lawyer contacted us yesterday with evidence that accelerated our timeline." Agent Morrison gestured toward Fletcher and his men. "These men just committed arson, attempted murder, and a dozen other federal offenses on behalf of a suspect in an ongoing investigation. Which means, congratulations, you just became our star witness." "What about Marcus?" Luke asked. "In custody as of an hour ago. We hit his office in Denver with a warrant based on the evidence Tom Chen provided. Found enough documentation to prove bribery, fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit violence. He's looking at 20 to 30 years minimum." Emily's legs went weak. "He's actually arrested." "It's actually over. The criminal case is just beginning. But yes, Marcus Brennan won't be threatening you or anyone else for a very long time." Agent Morrison smiled slightly. "You're free, Mrs. Hayes. Completely and legally free." The words didn't feel real. Emily looked at Luke, at the burning house behind them, at the federal agents processing Marcus's men, and none of it seemed possible. 3 months ago, she'd been running with no destination and no hope, and now she was sitting on a horse beside a man who loved her while watching her nightmare get loaded into police vehicles. "Your house," she said to Luke. "God, your house is gone. Everything you owned can be rebuilt." Luke dismounted and reached up to help Emily down. "Emily, it's just wood and nails. It's not what matters." "But your mother's things are gone, and that hurts. But she'd understand. She'd say a house is just a building, but the people inside it make it a home." Luke's hands stayed on Emily's waist even after her feet hit the ground. "We'll rebuild, together. And this time we'll do it right." Emily wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that tomorrow would be better, that Marcus being arrested meant safety instead of just a different kind of danger. But 3 years of running had taught her that hope was dangerous, and trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Except Luke had never lied to her, never manipulated or demanded or expected anything except that she keep breathing and fighting, and maybe that was enough to try. The next 2 weeks were chaos. Federal investigators interviewed Emily for hours at a time, documenting every instance of abuse and intimidation and violence that Marcus had perpetrated. Rachel filed motions to dismiss all charges against Emily, and won. Patterson was arrested for conspiracy and evidence tampering. The ranchers whose complaints had disappeared came forward with their own stories, and suddenly Marcus's empire was collapsing like a house of cards built on corruption and cruelty. Luke's insurance covered rebuilding the house, and every rancher within 50 miles showed up to help with the work. They raised walls and framed rooms, and by the end of the second week, there was a new structure standing where the old one had burned, different but solid. Emily worked alongside them, hammering nails and sawing boards, and learning that community could be a kind of strength she'd never experienced before. At night, she and Luke stayed in the small cabin Luke used for seasonal workers, one room with 2 beds and not enough space to avoid each other. They fell into an easy routine, cooking together, talking about the day's progress, sitting in comfortable silence, while Emily read and Luke sketched plans for the new house. But they never talked about what came next, about whether this marriage was still just a legal protection or something more. About the moment on the barn floor when Luke said he loved her, and Emily hadn't said it back. 3 weeks after the fire, the new house was finished enough to be livable. Luke showed Emily the main bedroom, larger than before, with windows facing east to catch the sunrise. "This is yours," he said. "I put a lock on the door, like the old room. Your space." Emily looked at the empty room at the bed frame, waiting for a mattress at the closet that would hold her clothes. Then she looked at Luke. "Where's your room?" "Down the hall. Figured we'd keep the same arrangement as before." "And if I don't want that arrangement anymore?" Luke's expression was carefully neutral. "Then we figure out something else." Emily's heart was pounding. She'd been thinking about this for 3 weeks, running the possibilities through her head every night in the narrow cabin bed. Thinking about trust and fear, and what it meant to choose vulnerability instead of safety. Thinking about Luke's hands, and his patience, and the way he'd held her while she cried without expecting anything in return. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "Of me, or of this, of not being good at it, of freezing up or panicking or disappointing you, of all the ways Marcus broke me, showing up at the worst possible moment." Emily's voice shook. Luke, I've never been with someone who actually cared whether I wanted to be there, and I don't know if I can—" "Emily, stop." Luke crossed the room and took her hands. "Whatever you're about to say, whatever you think you owe me, or should be ready for, to stop. I told you 3 weeks ago that I don't expect anything from you. That hasn't changed. But I want it to change. I want to try. I want—" Emily took a shaky breath. "I want to share a bed with you. Not because I think I have to, because I want to see what it's like to choose this instead of having it taken from me." Luke's eyes searched her face. "Are you sure? Because Emily, there's no rush. We can take this as slow as you need." "I've been taking it slow for 3 months. Maybe it's time to try being brave." "You're already the bravest person I know. Then let me be brave about this too." Emily stepped closer, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "Luke, I've never shared a bed with someone who loved me. Someone who'd wait 10 years if that's what I needed. Someone who sees me as more than property or obligation, or something to be used. And I need to know what that feels like before I lose my nerve." Luke's thumb brushed across her knuckles, gentle and careful. "Then we go at your pace. You change your mind at any point, we stop. No questions, no guilt, no disappointment. Deal." "Deal." He kissed her, then soft and questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Emily didn't pull away. She leaned into it, into him, into the terrifying possibility that maybe intimacy didn't have to hurt. That maybe choosing to be vulnerable with someone who'd earned that trust was the opposite of weakness. "I love you," she whispered against his mouth. "I should have said it 3 weeks ago, but I was too scared. But I'm saying it now. I love you, Luke Hayes." Luke's arms tightened around her. "I know. I've known since the day you looked at Marcus's lawyer and chose to fight instead of run. But hearing you say it," his voice cracked slightly, "that's everything." They didn't rush. They took their time learning each other in the soft afternoon light, and Emily discovered that intimacy could be gentle and patient and built on trust instead of fear. That wanting someone and being wanted in return felt nothing like the transactions Marcus had demanded. That choosing to be vulnerable with someone who respected that vulnerability was the most powerful thing she'd ever done. And later, lying beside Luke with her head on his chest and his hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder, Emily realized something profound. She wasn't broken. She'd been broken, yes. Marcus had done his best to shatter her into pieces too small to reassemble. But breaking wasn't the same as destroyed. And healing didn't mean going back to who she was before. It meant becoming someone new, someone who knew what darkness looked like, and chose light anyway. "You okay?" Luke asked softly. Emily smiled. "More than okay. I'm actually happy. When's the last time I got to say that?" "Then say it as many times as you want. I'll never get tired of hearing it." 6 months later, Emily stood in the rebuilt kitchen making coffee while Luke fed the horses, and everything felt surreal in the best possible way. Marcus was serving 25 years in a federal prison. The ranch was thriving. Emily had testified in 3 separate trials and watched men who'd terrorized her and others get exactly what they deserved. But more than any of that, she'd built a life worth living. She'd learned to trust herself and her judgment. She'd discovered that strength wasn't about never being afraid, it was about being afraid and moving forward anyway. She'd found partnership with someone who saw her as an equal instead of property. And she'd learned that healing wasn't linear, or predictable, or easy. Some days, she still woke up expecting Marcus to be standing over her bed. Some days, panic hit her out of nowhere, and Luke had to talk her through it. Some days, the weight of everything she'd survived felt like too much to carry. But those days were getting fewer. And the good days, the days when she woke up beside someone who loved her, when she worked the ranch with capable hands, when she looked at her life and felt proud instead of ashamed. Those days were getting more common. "Coffee's ready," Luke called from the doorway, and Emily smiled because this was her life now. This simple domestic moment with a good man in a home they'd built together. Not perfect, not without struggle, but hers by choice instead of circumstance. She poured 2 cups and carried them outside to where Luke was standing by the barn, looking out over the land that had become Emily's sanctuary. He took the coffee with a kiss that still made her heart kick, and they stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sun come up over Wyoming. "You know what today is?" Luke asked. "Tuesday. 1 year since you showed up bleeding in my alley. 1 year since everything changed." Emily leaned against his side. "Best year of my life, even counting the parts where people tried to kill us." "Same. And Emily..." Luke turned to face her fully. "I know we got married under pressure and for legal reasons, but I'd like to do it again. The right way. With our friends and a celebration and vows that aren't about protection, but about building a future together. What do you think?" Emily's throat felt tight with emotion. "I think that sounds perfect. I think marrying you was the smartest thing I've ever done, even when I thought I was doing it for all the wrong reasons. And I think..." She paused, her hand moving to her stomach where something new was growing. Something she'd only confirmed yesterday and hadn't told anyone yet. "I think our family is about to get bigger." Luke's eyes went wide. "Are you pregnant?" "Actually pregnant this time. Not manufactured evidence or manipulation. Just us and biology, and the fact that apparently we're having a baby." For a moment, Luke just stared at her. Then, he was laughing and crying at the same time, pulling her close and holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "We're having a baby," he said wonderingly. "We're actually having a baby. Are you happy?" Emily asked, suddenly uncertain. "Because we never talked about this, and I don't even know if you want kids, and..." "Emily, I'm so happy I can barely breathe. We're going to have a family, a real family built on love instead of obligation or fear. That's..." He stopped, overcome. "That's everything I've ever wanted." Emily pressed her face against his chest and let herself cry happy tears, for the first time in longer than she could remember. This was what survival looked like. Not just staying alive, but building something beautiful from broken pieces. Not just escaping darkness, but creating light strong enough to push back against it. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." "And Emily," Luke's voice was firm with certainty, "you're going to be an incredible mother, because you already know what it looks like when someone destroys a child's sense of safety, which means you'll do everything in your power to build something different, to show this baby what real love looks like." Emily nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. She thought about the terrified woman who'd stumbled onto this ranch a year ago with nothing except desperation and determination. Thought about everything she'd survived and overcome and rebuilt. Thought about the child growing inside her, who would never know what it felt like to be owned by someone else's cruelty. That child would know safety and choice and unconditional love, would know what it meant to have parents who chose each other every single day, would grow up understanding that strength wasn't about never being afraid, but about facing fear and moving forward anyway. And that Emily realized was the best revenge she could possibly take against Marcus Brennan and everything he'd tried to destroy. Not just surviving, not just healing, but thriving, building a family, creating a future so full of love and light that the darkness couldn't touch it. "Come on," Luke said, taking her hand. "Let's go start planning that wedding, and maybe start thinking about baby names. And definitely start figuring out where we're going to put a nursery in this house." Emily laughed and let him pull her toward the house, toward their future, toward everything they'd fought so hard to build. The sun was fully up now, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and pink, and Emily had never seen anything more beautiful. She'd spent 3 years running from a nightmare, and 1 year learning how to stand still long enough to build something worth staying for. And now she was going to spend the rest of her life showing her child what it looked like to choose love over fear, trust over suspicion, hope over despair. Because Emily, Hayes formerly, Carter formerly, Brennan finally and completely. Hayes had learned the most important lesson survival could teach, that being broken wasn't the end of the story, and healing was always possible if you were brave enough to try. And she was brave enough. She'd always been brave enough. She just hadn't known it until a cowboy named Luke Hayes looked at her bleeding in an alley and saw strength instead of weakness, possibility instead of damage, a future instead of just a past. That future was here now, bright and real and full of promise, and Emily was finally ready to claim every beautiful moment of it.